Jihad Squad. She'd suggested Omar was a terrorist sympathizer. She'd even filmed herself stalking Omar through the Capitol, phone in hand, narrating her hunt like some deranged safari guide tracking prey. The pattern was as predictable as it was profitable. Boebert would say something vile about Omar, usually invoking barely veiled references to 9/11 or terrorism. The media would explode. Democrats would demand an apology. The civil war in Somalia had taken everything. Her mother died when Ilhan was 2, not from bullets or bombs, but from the diseases that flourish when society collapses. Her father, Nur Omar Mohammed, had been a teacher and civil servant before the war, a man who believed in education and democracy. Now he was just another refugee trying to keep his children alive as Mogadishu burned around them. They fled in 1991, joining the river of humanity walking toward Kenya, toward anywhere that wasn't home. Ilhan remembered fragments, the weight of her baby sister on her back, the taste of dust, the bodies by the roadside that adults told children not to look at. She remembered her father's hand, impossibly strong, pulling her forward when her legs wanted to stop. The Utanje refugee camp in Kenya was supposed to be temporary. The dog whistle was so loud it was practically a foghorn. Across the chamber, Ilhan Omar didn't flinch. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing, her face a mask of calm concentration. If Boebert wanted to hang herself with her own words, Omar would make sure she had the rope. We're talking about spending millions on refugees from a country that harbors terrorists, Boebert continued, her voice climbing. Get ready for the most shocking content on the internet. Subscribe to Shockfiler now and join the Shockfiler community that's not afraid to dive into the unknown. Shockfiler. Let's get this shockwave started. To understand how a refugee taught a congresswoman about American values, we need to go back 48 hours to when the House convened for what should have been a routine vote. The Afghan Adjustment Act was on the floor, a bipartisan bill to provide permanent residency pathways for Afghan allies who'd risked everything to help American troops. These were translators who'd worn targets on their backs, drivers who'd navigated IED-laden roads, fixers who'd made the impossible possible for 20 years of war. The bill should have passed easily. After all, these weren't random refugees. These were people who'd saved American lives, people who'd believed our promises, people who'd watched the Taliban hunt their families because they'd chosen to stand with us. Even Republicans from military districts knew voting against it would be political suicide. The vets were watching. The moral case was ironclad. But Lauren Boebert saw an opportunity. She'd arrived that morning with a folder thick with xenophobic talking points, each one crafted to transform a humanitarian obligation into an existential threat. Her staff had worked overtime to reframe Afghan allies as potential terrorists, to twist gratitude into fear, to make keeping our promises sound like weakness. She'd even brought props, enlarged photos of crime statistics from refugee resettlement areas, carefully stripped of context to maximize fear. We're not talking about a few interpreters, Boebert had told her team in the pre-meeting. We're talking about an invasion. These people don't share our values. They don't understand our way of life. And I'm going to make sure America knows it. What Boebert didn't know was that Ilhan Omar had specifically requested to speak during this debate. For Omar, this wasn't just policy. It was personal. She'd been 8 years old when she'd fled civil war in Somalia, spending 4 years in a Ken Bersans Yan refugee camp before America opened its doors. She knew what it meant to wait for salvation, to hope against hope that the country that called itself the land of the free would live up to its promise. Omar had prepared differently than Boebert. Where Boebert brought fear, Omar brought facts. Where Boebert brought hatred, Omar brought history. She'd compiled stories of Afghan interpreters who'd saved entire platoons, of women judges who'd defied the Taliban to uphold justice, of children who'd learned English by watching American movies in secret, risking beatings just to touch the dream of freedom. But more than that, Omar understood something fundamental about this moment. This wasn't really about Afghan refugees. This was about who we are as Americans. Do we keep our promises? Do we abandon those who risked everything for us? Do we let fear override honor? The answer to those questions would echo far beyond this vote. The debate was scheduled for 2 p.m. By 1:45, both women were in their seats. Boebert was practically vibrating with anticipation, her phone already recording for the social media clips she'd post later. She kept glancing at Omar, measuring her target, calculating her angles of attack. Omar sat quietly, reviewing her notes one last time. She'd written 3 words at the top of her page, circled in blue ink. Grace under fire. She'd learned long ago that the best response to hatred wasn't more hatred. It was dignity so unshakable that it made the hate look small by comparison. The gallery was packed. Afghan veterans filled the front rows, some still bearing the scars of their service to America. Their families sat behind them, children who'd grown up on American bases, who'd learned the Pledge of Allegiance before they could walk. They'd come to see if America would keep its word. Speaker McCarthy called the session to order. The clerk read the bill number, and Lauren Boebert's hand shot up, eager to be the first to speak, to set the tone, to own the narrative. She had no idea she was about to hand Ilhan Omar the perfect moment to show America what real patriotism looked like. While Boebert built her career on hate, a young girl in a refugee camp was dreaming of America. But first, we need to understand the calculated cruelty that Lauren Boebert had turned into a political brand. This wasn't Boebert's first attack on Ilhan Omar. It wasn't even her worst. For 3 years, she'd made targeting Omar her signature move, the reliable applause line that sent her fundraising emails into overdrive and her social media engagement through the roof. She'd called Omar a member of the Jihad Squad. She'd suggested Omar was a terrorist sympathizer. She'd even filmed herself stalking Omar through the Capitol, phone in hand, narrating her hunt like some deranged safari guide tracking prey. The pattern was as predictable as it was profitable. Boebert would say something vile about Omar, usually invoking barely veiled references to 9/11 or terrorism. The media would explode. Democrats would demand an apology. Boebert would issue a non-apology that somehow made things worse, claiming she was just telling hard truths or defending America. Then she'd send out fundraising emails with subject lines like, "I refuse to apologize to the radical left," and watch the money pour in from supporters who confused cruelty with courage. Just 2 weeks before this House debate, Boebert had sent out an email blast that featured Omar's face, photoshopped next to burning buildings. Ilhan Omar wants to bring the chaos of Somalia to your neighborhood, the text read. Chip in $25 to help me stop her radical agenda. The email raised $73,000 in 48 hours. Hatred, Boebert had learned, was a renewable resource in American politics. Her base didn't want policy. They wanted blood. They wanted to see the Muslim woman in the hijab put in her place. They wanted someone to say out loud what they muttered in their living rooms. And Boebert, who'd barely graduated high school and got her GED just before running for Congress, had figured out that she didn't need to understand complex legislation or international relations. She just needed to hate the right people loudly enough. The fake apologies had become part of the show. After the Jihad Squad incident, Boebert had posted a video where she claimed to be sorry if anyone was offended, while simultaneously doubling down on her attacks. She'd learned from Trump himself. Never actually apologize. Just pretend to while winking at your base. The video got 2 million views. The follow-up fundraising email, titled, "The Woke Mob Tried to Silence Me," raised another 6 figures. But here's what made Boebert particularly dangerous. She wasn't stupid. The theatrical aggression, the calculated bigotry, the strategic stunts, they were all carefully calibrated for maximum impact and minimum consequence. She knew exactly where the line was, and she tap danced on it like a performer who'd found her stage. She knew that in certain districts, in certain corners of America, hating Ilhan Omar wasn't just acceptable, it was required. She'd studied the metrics obsessively. Every anti-Omar tweet averaged 3 times the engagement of her policy posts. Every confrontation with Omar led to a spike in small dollar donations, Every time she made Omar a target, her approval ratings with her base climbed. She'd even hired a consultant whose sole job was to find new ways to attack Omar without quite crossing into legally actionable territory. Walking into the House chamber that day, Boebert felt invincible. She had her talking points memorized, each one focus grouped for maximum emotional impact. She had her camera crew ready to capture her brave stand against radical Islam. She had her fundraising team on standby, ready to turn whatever happened into cash. She looked across at Omar, sitting quietly at her desk, and saw not a colleague or even a human being. She saw a prop in her political theater, a reliable villain in the story she sold to supporters who needed someone to blame for their fears. She saw dollar signs and retweets and Fox News hits. What she didn't see was the trap she was about to walk into. Because while Lauren Boebert had spent 3 years perfecting the politics of hate, Ilhan Omar had spent a lifetime perfecting something far more powerful. She'd perfected the politics of grace. While Boebert built her career on hate, a young girl in a refugee camp was dreaming of America. 8-year-old Ilhan Omar didn't know what America looked like, but she knew what it meant. It meant safety. It meant possibility. It meant a place where the sound of gunfire didn't wake you up at night. The civil war in Somalia had taken everything. Her mother died when Ilhan was 2, not from bullets or bombs, but from the diseases that flourish when society collapses. Her father, Nur Omar Mohammed, had been a teacher and civil servant before the war, a man who believed in education and democracy. Now he was just another refugee, trying to keep his children alive as Mogadishu burned around them. They fled in 1991, joining the river of humanity, walking toward Kenya, toward anywhere that wasn't home. Han remembered fragments, the weight of her baby sister on her back, the taste of dust, the bodies by the roadside that adults told children not to look at. She remembered her father's hand, impossibly strong, pulling her forward when her legs wanted to stop. The Utanja refugee camp in Kenya was supposed to be temporary. It became home for 4 years. Imagine a city of tents stretching to the horizon, where water came in trucks if you were lucky, where food was whatever the UN could deliver, where hope was rationed more carefully than rice. This was where Ilhan Omar learned her first lessons about America. The lessons came from a battery-powered TV in the camp's community center, playing bootleg VHS tapes of American shows. Baywatch, The Cosby Show, Family Matters. These were her English teachers. She'd sit cross-legged on the dirt floor with dozens of other children, mouthing words she didn't understand, trying to decode this magical place where people had houses with doors that locked, where children went to school in clean clothes, where families sat around dinner tables instead of cooking fires. "That's where we're going," her father would tell her, pointing at the screen. "The land of opportunity. In America, you can become anything." "Even if you're a girl?" 12-year-old Ilhan asked. "Especially if you're a girl," he replied. "In America, they have women judges, women doctors, women in Congress. In America, what matters is here." He tapped her forehead. "Not here." He gestured at their surroundings. The day their asylum was approved, her father wept. Not the silent tears of grief she'd seen before, but deep, body-shaking sobs of relief. They were going to America. They were going to live. Minneapolis in October 1995 was a different kind of shock. The cold hit like a physical assault. This skinny refugee girl from the equator had never imagined air could hurt. But the Somali community wrapped them in warmth, literal and figurative. Donated coats, steaming sambusas, and most importantly, stories of success. This refugee had become a doctor. That one owned a business. This one's daughter was going to college. Ilhan threw herself into becoming American with the intensity of someone who understood that citizenship was a gift, not a birthright. She devoured books, stayed after school for extra English lessons, watched C-SPAN instead of cartoons. By high school, she was translating for newly arrived families, seeing her own journey reflected in their eyes, that mixture of terror and hope that every refugee knows. At Edison High School, she organized her first political meeting, gathering Somali parents to demand more translators at parent-teacher conferences. When the principal said there wasn't money in the budget, 17-year-old Ilhan researched grant opportunities, wrote the application herself, and secured $50,000 in funding. The principal's shock was her first taste of what happened when people underestimated her. College at North Dakota State, then work as a nutrition educator, teaching immigrant families how to navigate American grocery stores. Every paycheck felt like a miracle. Money earned in safety, in a country where women could work, could drive, could dream. She married, had children, divorced, rebuilt. Each challenge met with her father's words echoing, "In America, you can become anything." The 2016 election changed everything. Watching Trump's Muslim ban, seeing refugees like her family demonized, something shifted. She'd been killing them with kindness in small rooms. Maybe it was time for a bigger stage. When she announced her run for Minnesota State House, reporters asked why a Somali refugee thought she could win. "Because I understand American values better than people who inherited them," she answered. "I chose America. I fought to get here. I learned its language from TV shows in a refugee camp. Every day I wake up here is a day I'm grateful for. That's patriotism." She won with 80% of the vote. 2 years later, when she ran for Congress, the attacks were vicious. Death threats, racist cartoons, questions about her loyalty that no third-generation American would face. Her response became her signature. Kill them with kindness and facts. When they questioned her patriotism, she listed her legislative achievements. When they attacked her faith, she quoted the Constitution. When they said she didn't belong, she smiled and said, "I'm exactly where America's promise said I could be." Now, sitting in the House chamber as Lauren Boebert prepared to attack everything she represented, Ilhan Omar felt the weight of every refugee who'd ever believed in America's promise. She thought of that 8-year-old girl in the camp, learning English from Baywatch, dreaming of a country that would let her become anything. That little girl had become a United States Congresswoman, and she was about to show Lauren Boebert what American values really looked like. The moment Speaker McCarthy recognized Lauren Boebert, the atmosphere in the House chamber shifted like air before a thunderstorm. She gripped the edges of the podium with white knuckles, her prepared remarks forgotten, replaced by something rawer and uglier. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker," she began, her voice already carrying that sharp edge that made staffers reach for their phones to record. "I rise today to speak for real Americans who are sick and tired of watching this country hand out charity to people whose loyalty will always be somewhere else." The dog whistle was so loud it was practically a foghorn. Across the chamber, Ilhan Omar didn't flinch. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing, her face a mask of calm concentration. If Boebert wanted to hang herself with her own words, Omar would make sure she had the rope. "We're talking about spending millions on refugees from a country that harbors terrorists," Boebert continued, her voice climbing. "Meanwhile, veterans in my district are sleeping on the streets. Real Americans who bled for this country are forgotten while we roll out the red carpet for people who, let's be honest, will never truly be American." Matt Gaetz shifted in his seat. Even he looked uncomfortable with where this was heading. Nancy Mace was studying her phone intently, trying to disappear. Behind Boebert, several Republicans were exchanging glances that clearly said, "She's going too far." But Boebert was just warming up. The fundraising emails, the Fox News hits, the social media engagement, it all depended on moments like this. She needed the clip. She needed the confrontation. She needed Omar to react. "And speaking of loyalty," Boebert's eyes found Omar across the chamber, "maybe we should ask why certain members of this body seem more concerned with bringing their fellow refugees here than with protecting American citizens. Maybe we should ask why someone who came here as a refugee thinks she can lecture us about American values." "Point of order!" Pramila Jayapal was on her feet. "The gentlewoman is engaging in personal attacks. The gentlewoman is recognized and has the flute." McCarthy intoned, not even looking up. Boebert's smile was predatory. She had permission. She had protection. She had her target in sight. We're supposed to believe that people who come from countries where women can't drive, where democracy doesn't exist, where violence is a way of life, we're supposed to believe they'll magically become patriots? We're supposed to trust that their allegiance isn't divided. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tried next. Mr. Speaker, these xenophobic attacks. The gentlewoman from Colorado has the floor, McCarthy repeated, his gavel punctuating the permission to continue. Omar kept writing. Her pen moved steadily across the page, documenting every slur, every dog whistle, every moment that revealed exactly who Lauren Boebert was. Around her, Democratic colleagues were getting agitated. They wanted her to respond, to fight back, to shut this down. But Omar had learned long ago that when your enemy is destroying themselves, you don't interrupt. Boebert's voice was approaching a screech now. We have members in this very body who put on a hijab every morning, a constant reminder that their allegiance is to something other than America. We have members who came here with nothing and now want to bring everyone from their homeland to take what real Americans built. The chamber erupted. Democrats were shouting. Republicans were trying to distance themselves. The gallery was buzzing with shocked whispers, but through it all, Omar kept writing. That's when Boebert made her fatal mistake. Drunk on her own performance, high on the reaction she was getting, she abandoned the last pretense of policy debate. Maybe if Representative Omar spent less time trying to import the third world and more time being grateful for what America gave her, she pointed directly at Omar, her finger shaking with rage. Maybe if she understood that real Americans don't forget where their loyalty lies. Her voice cracked, climbing to a pitch that made even her supporters wince. You have no right to lecture us about American values. You have no right to... And that's when Omar finally looked up. She set down her pen with deliberate calm. She folded her hands, and she smiled that slight smile that would soon be seen around the world. Because Lauren Boebert had just given her exactly what she needed. Every slur, every dog whistle, every xenophobic attack had been documented. The mask was off. The hatred was exposed. And now, it was time for Grace to enter the conversation. Omar reached for her microphone, and the entire chamber held its breath. Tau. Section 6. Grace under fire. And then Omar stood up, and the entire chamber held its breath. She rose slowly, deliberately, her movements carrying the weight of every refugee who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Her hands moved to adjust her hijab, not nervously, but with the practiced dignity of someone who'd learned that presentation mattered, when the world was looking for reasons to dismiss you. The simple gesture somehow commanded more attention than all of Boebert's screaming. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of quiet authority that only comes from having survived worse than anything your opponent could throw at you. Representative Boebert, let me tell you about American values. The words landed like a judge's gavel. Boebert, who'd been preparing another volley of hatred, actually took a step back. Democrats leaned forward. Republicans shifted uncomfortably. The gallery went completely silent. American values, Omar continued, her voice steady as a heartbeat, are what brought my family here when we had nothing but hope. American values are what allowed a refugee girl to stand before you as a member of Congress. American values are what I've spent my entire adult life serving. She paused, letting each word find its mark. When I was 17, I organized my first political action, not a protest but a solution. Somali parents needed translators at school meetings. I didn't complain about the system. I found grants, wrote applications, and secured funding. That's American values, seeing a problem and fixing it. Boebert's face was reddening. She moved toward her microphone, mouth opening to interrupt, but Omar continued with the unstoppable force of truth. At 23, I was a nutrition educator, teaching immigrant families how to navigate American grocery stores, how to read labels, how to feed their children in this new land. I didn't just translate languages, I translated dreams. That's American values, lifting others as you climb. The chamber was transfixed. Even the pages had stopped their usual shuffling. Omar's voice remained calm, but something underneath it was building, like distant thunder. In the Minnesota State House, I authored 38 bills, not tweets. Representative Boebert, not stunts, bills, for education funding, for environmental protection, for small business support. I worked with Republicans who saw past my hijab to my ideas. That's American values, building bridges, not burning them. She turned slightly, addressing not just Boebert but the entire chamber. You want to talk about loyalty to America? Let's talk about the 40,000 refugees who've served in our military since 2001. Let's talk about the Afghan interpreters who died protecting American soldiers, who showed more patriotism than people who wave flags but abandon allies. Her voice grew stronger, filling the chamber. Let's talk about data, since facts seem to threaten you. Refugees contribute $63 billion to the U.S. economy annually. We start businesses at twice the rate of native-born Americans. We raise children who become doctors, teachers, soldiers. We won't take from America, we add to it. Boebert lunged for her microphone. You can't. Bang! Speaker McCarthy's gavel came down hard. The gentlewoman from Minnesota has the floor. Omar nodded slightly in acknowledgement, then turned back to Boebert, and for the first time her voice cracked, not with weakness, but with the weight of truth too heavy to carry lightly. I chose America, Representative Boebert. I chose it when I was 8 years old in a refugee camp, learning English from a broken TV. I chose it when kids mocked my accent. I chose it when people like you said I didn't belong. I choose it every day when I wake up and serve the country that saved my life. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft, but devastating. What have you chosen besides hate? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Boebert's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. For perhaps the first time in her political career, she had no response. How do you answer when someone's grace makes your hatred look so small? Omar wasn't finished. She stepped away from her desk, moving closer to the center aisle, her presence filling the space that Boebert's rage had tried to dominate. You see my hijab, and see a threat. I see your pain and recognize fear. You think attacking me makes you strong. I know that real strength is choosing love when hate would be easier. You fundraise off my name, turn me into a monster for profit. I pray for you. Republicans were staring at their desks. Democrats were wiping their eyes. In the gallery, an Afghan veteran was openly weeping. The moral authority in the room had shifted so completely that it felt like gravity had reversed. Omar's final words came slowly, each one placed with surgical precision. Representative Boebert, I pray that one day you find the peace that America gave me. I pray that you discover the strength that comes from building rather than burning. I pray that you learn what I learned in that refugee camp, that America isn't great because of who it excludes, but because of who it empowers to become their best selves. She adjusted her hijab one more time, a gesture that now seemed like a crown being settled. I am Ilhan Omar. I am a refugee. I am an American. And I am exactly where I belong. The silence that followed was complete. Not the uncomfortable silence of scandal or the tense silence of conflict, but the sacred silence that follows truth so pure it needs no elaboration. Boebert stood frozen at her desk, her face a canvas of emotions: shock, shame, rage, and something that looked almost like recognition. Then, from somewhere in the gallery, came the sound of a single person clapping. Slow, deliberate applause that was quickly joined by another, then another. The rules of decorum forgotten. The gallery erupted. The Afghan veterans were on their feet. Even some Republicans were nodding, unable to deny the power of what they'd witnessed. But Ilhan Omar had already returned to her seat, hands folded, that same slight smile on her lips. She'd said what needed to be said. She'd chosen grace over grievance, facts over fury, dignity over destruction. And in doing so, she'd shown America what it could be when it lived up to its promises. But this was bigger than one viral moment. This was about who we choose to be as a nation. Within minutes of Omar's devastating response, The clip was everywhere. A staffer from the gallery had been streaming on Instagram Live, and their shaky footage of Omar's "I chose America, what have you chosen besides hate?" was racing past 1 million views before she'd even returned to her seat. #Omar Grace exploded across Twitter like a cultural supernova. The hashtag wasn't just trending, it was dominating, pushing aside celebrity gossip and sports scores as Americans of every political stripe weighed in on what they'd just witnessed. @Veterans4Peace posted, "This refugee understands service better than most people born here. Proud to call Ilhan Omar a fellow American." The tweet garnered 200,000 likes in an hour. The veteran community's response was particularly powerful. A thread by @CombatVetJoe went mega viral. "I served with Afghan interpreters who risked everything for us. Watching Ilhan Omar defend them with such grace while being attacked. I'm not crying. You're crying. This is the America I fought for." Veterans began posting photos of themselves with their interpreters, sharing stories of lives saved, friendships forged under fire, and promises made to allies who believed in American values. Religious leaders across denominations recognized something sacred in Omar's response. Pastor John Pavlovitz tweeted, "When Ilhan Omar said 'I pray for you' to someone attacking her faith and patriotism, she showed us what turning the other cheek actually looks like. This is Christianity. This is Islam. This is humanity." The Council on American-Islamic Relations reported a surge in interfaith dialogue requests, as Americans sought to understand the faith that could produce such grace under fire. Even Republicans couldn't ignore what had happened. Senator Mitt Romney issued a careful statement. "While I may disagree with Representative Omar on policy, her response today showed dignity and patriotism that should make all Americans proud." Behind the scenes, GOP strategists were in panic mode. Focus groups were showing that suburban women, their must-win demographic, were appalled by Boebert's attack and inspired by Omar's response. Boebert's attempt at damage control was a masterclass in making things worse. She posted a video from her car, clearly rattled, trying to reframe the narrative. "The radical left is trying to silence me for asking tough questions about." But the comments were brutal. Even her own supporters were divided. "I usually agree with you, Lauren, but that was too much," read one top comment. "She made you look small," read another. Her fundraising email that night, "The woke mob is coming for me," fell flat. For the first time in 3 years, attacking Ilhan Omar didn't translate to donations. The returns were so bad her finance director called an emergency meeting. The magic formula had broken. Grace had neutralized hate's profitability. Meanwhile, Omar's social media exploded in the opposite direction. Her follower count jumped by 400,000 in 6 hours. Her mentions were flooded with American flags, hearts, and messages of support from people who'd never heard of her before today. "I'm a Republican from Texas," one message read, "but you showed more class in 5 minutes than I've seen from most politicians in years. Respect." Cable news couldn't get enough. CNN replayed the exchange on loop with chyrons like "Grace under fire" and "The power of dignity." MSNBC brought on body language experts to analyze the moment Boebert realized she'd lost. Even Fox News, after initially trying to spin it as "Omar plays victim card," had to acknowledge the power of the moment when their own viewers started calling in to praise Omar's composure. The international response was equally telling. The BBC called it a masterclass in American democratic discourse. Le Monde ran the headline, "When Grace Defeats Hate." The footage was subtitled in dozens of languages, sparking conversations about immigration, belonging, and national identity across the globe. But perhaps the most meaningful responses came from refugees and immigrants across America. "I Chose America" began trending as thousands shared their own stories. A doctor from Syria, a teacher from Vietnam, an entrepreneur from Nigeria, all posting about why they chose America and what they'd contributed. The narrative was shifting in real time from us versus them to we. Young Muslim girls posted videos thanking Omar for showing them how to respond to hatred with dignity. "My daughter watched this and said, 'I want to be like her,'" one mother wrote. "Not because she's in Congress, but because she showed that grace is stronger than hate. By evening, Omar posted a simple message: "Thank you, Fee, or the overwhelming support. Remember, we don't defeat darkness by adding to it. We light candles. Today, millions of you lit candles. That's the America I chose. That's the America worth fighting for." The post broke Instagram records for engagement from a political figure. America hadn't just witnessed a political moment. They'd witnessed a moral lesson in real time. And for once, grace was winning the day. But this was bigger than one viral moment. This was about who we choose to be as a democracy. What happened in the House chamber that day wasn't just a political exchange. It was a masterclass in how to disarm hatred without becoming hateful, how to stand firm without stooping low, how to redefine strength in an era that had confused volume with valor. For years, American politics had been trapped in an escalating cycle of performative outrage. The loudest voice won. The most shocking statement got the coverage. The cruelest attack earned the applause. Politicians had learned that anger was currency, that division paid dividends, that you could build a career on breaking things rather than building them. Lauren Boebert was simply the latest iteration of this playbook. All fury, no substance, all performance, no purpose. But Ilhan Omar had just shown America a different way. She redefined strength not as the ability to attack, but as the discipline to absorb attacks without being diminished by them. When Boebert screamed, Omar spoke softly. When Boebert spewed hatred, Omar offered prayers. When Boebert questioned her Americanness, Omar demonstrated American values in real time. It wasn't weakness. It was the kind of strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to let anyone make you smaller. This was grace as resistance. Not the passive grace of accepting injustice, but the active grace of confronting it with such dignity that the injustice reveals itself. Omar didn't need to call Boebert a bigot. Boebert's own words did that. Omar didn't need to match Boebert's anger. The contrast did more damage than any insult could. She had weaponized composure, turned dignity into a devastating political tool. And the facts, those still mattered. But Omar showed that how you deliver them matters just as much. She didn't throw statistics like grenades. She wove them into a narrative of service, of contribution, of choosing America every single day. When she spoke about refugees contributing $63 billion to the economy, it wasn't a defensive argument. It was a love letter to American opportunity. When she listed her legislative achievements, it wasn't a resume. It was proof that building beats burning every time. The visual contrast made Boebert's hatred look exactly as small as it was. Here was Boebert, red-faced and screaming, reduced to playground taunts about loyalty and belonging. And here was Omar, composed and clear-eyed, speaking about service and prayer, and the choice to love a country even when some of its people didn't love you back. It was like watching a LD's tantrum next to an adult's wisdom. The power dynamic shifted not through force, but through the simple act of refusing to meet ugliness with more ugliness. This became Omar's model for confronting bigotry, and America was taking notes. You don't debate hatred, you transcend it. You don't wrestle with pigs, you stay clean and let them reveal their own mud. You don't defend your humanity, you demonstrate it so clearly that anyone questioning it reveals their own inhumanity. Political scientists would later study this moment as a turning point in American discourse. Dr. Sarah Johnson at Georgetown wrote, Omar showed that in an attention economy that rewards outrage, grace becomes revolutionary. When everyone expects you to fight fire with fire, choosing water changes the entire dynamic. The exhaustion with performative outrage was palpable in the public response. Americans were tired of the show, tired of politicians who treated governance like professional wrestling, tired of having to choose between different flavors of anger. Omar offered something different: competence with compassion, strength with serenity, facts with feeling. She showed that you could be fierce without being cruel, powerful without being punitive. Young politicians took notice. In the weeks following, Congressional freshmen from both parties started adopting elements of the Omar approach, coming to debates overprepared, responding to attacks with policy achievements, meeting personal insults with systemic solutions. The theatrical anger that had dominated politics for years suddenly looked outdated, like a flip phone in the smartphone era. But the deeper lesson was about democracy itself. In a system premised on the idea that good arguments defeat bad ones, that truth matters, that character counts, Omar had proven these premises still held. She showed that demagoguery's weakness was its empty. All noise, no substance. When confronted with actual achievement, actual service, actual grace, it crumbled like the hollow performance it was. As one political observer noted, Boebert brought a flamethrower to what she thought was a firefight. Omar brought a mirror. Guess which one did more damage? The answer was clear to anyone watching. In the battle between grace and grievance, grace hadn't just won. It had redefined what winning looked like. Remember that slight smile on Ilhan Omar's face as Lauren Boebert's rage crashed against her composure, like waves against a lighthouse? That wasn't just a smile. That was the face of someone who understood a fundamental truth. Grace isn't weakness. It's the ultimate strength. It's the power to let someone else's hatred reveal their emptiness, while your dignity fills the room. In those few minutes on the House floor, one woman's composure exposed another's hollowness. Boebert brought volume. Omar brought value. Boebert brought fear. Omar brought facts. Boebert questioned who belonged in America. Omar showed what belonging to America really means, choosing it, serving it, improving it, even when some of its citizens tell you you'll never be enough. But here's what should really stay with you. Omar's grace wasn't superhuman. It was a choice. A choice available to every single one of us every single day. When someone questions your worth, you can choose to prove it through achievement. When someone attacks your identity, you can choose to respond with dignity. When someone tries to make you small, you can choose to stand tall without standing on anyone else. The American dream isn't just defended in Congress. It's defended every time an immigrant opens a business, every time a refugee becomes a doctor, every time someone who was told they don't belong decides to belong anyway. It's defended by those who lived it, who chose it, who know its value because they've seen life without it. So here's your challenge. Be the grace in someone else's storm. When you face your own Lauren Boeberts, and we all do, remember Ilhan Omar's model. Prepare with facts, respond with dignity, let your achievements speak louder than their anger. Choose grace not because it's easy, but because it's powerful. Want to see more moments where dignity defeats demagoguery? Where preparation demolishes prejudice? Where grace wins the day? Subscribe now. Because in a world full of people choosing grievance, we need to celebrate those who choose grace. The revolution isn't just being televised, it's being redefined. One smile at a time.